out on the farthest edge of Imperial space, in a region so empty and silent that even stars seemed afraid to shine. A small alien patrol ship drifted through the darkness on a routine scan, its crew bored, relaxed, half asleep, because nothing ever happened this far from civilization. Nothing ever changed. Nothing ever appeared in the void beyond the border. And for years the patrols had been the same, quiet, calm, uneventful, until on this night, everything changed with one soft, almost lazy beep from the long-range scanner, a tiny sound that made the navigation officer frown and lean forward, expecting a glitch, maybe an asteroid, maybe a broken signal. But when the data sharpened, when the scanner zoomed in, his eyes widened, his hands froze, and his voice cracked into a whisper that shook the silence apart. Contact, massive contact. And the entire bridge went still, every officer turning toward the screen as a shape slowly emerged from the blackness. A shape so huge it didn't fit into the scan frame, so massive that the ship's computer struggled to outline it. And the captain squinted, confused, thinking it must be a cluster of objects, a field of wreckage, anything except what it looked like. One single structure floating alone in the endless night, and as the patrol ship drifted closer, the shadow grew larger and larger, until it blocked out entire star fields, swallowing starlight like a black wall, and the crew felt a pressure in their chests, a silent fear that tightened their throats, because nothing in the Empire's records, nothing in their history, nothing in known engineering could explain a ship this size, a ship that looked less like a vessel and more like a drifting continent of metal. The captain ordered full magnification, and the screen zoomed closer, revealing dark armor plates, smooth, unbroken, flawless, stretching for miles with no visible engines, no windows, no signs of life, no insignias or markings that identified an owner, nothing but cold steel adrift in silence, and one officer whispered shakily, "Maybe it's a dead station." But another shook his head, pointing at the density readings, voice trembling. "No station has armor that thick. No station is built like a warship." And a chill spread through the patrol crew as they realized they were staring at something unknown, something impossible, something terrifying, and yet the massive object just floated there, silent, cold, giving no signal, no heat signature, no movement, like a ghost ship lost in time. The Empire had cataloged every warship ever built, every station, every vessel, every floating ruin. And yet this was unlike anything in their archives, something older or newer or stranger than anything they knew, and the crew exchanged fearful glances, because the object was not orbiting a planet, not anchored to any structure. It was drifting under its own mass, as if it had traveled here deliberately and then gone still, waiting in the dark like a sleeping giant. The captain's voice cracked as he ordered a deeper scan, and the computer hummed, struggling to penetrate the armor, sending pulse after pulse into the structure. But everything came back blocked, blank, unreadable, and that made the fear worse because only military-grade warships had that kind of shielding, and even then, none were this massive, none were this silent, none were this ominous. As the patrol ship crept closer, the giant vessel filled their entire viewport like a planet made of steel, and the crew members' hearts pounded faster, breath trembling, because every instinct screamed that this thing was not abandoned, not harmless, not dead, just waiting, and then, without warning, a small panel on the screen flickered, glitching, buzzing, before a single faint reading appeared. An internal structure scan had caught something, a fragment, a buried marking, and the crew leaned in, confused, as a faint image formed, blurry at first, then clearing slowly until faded letters appeared on the armor beneath layers of dust and time. Letters written in a language ancient to them but still recognized across the galaxy. Letters that spelled one word, one name, one origin, human, and the bridge erupted into chaos. Officers stumbled back, some gasping, some shaking, one covering his mouth in disbelief, because humans were supposed to be primitive, harmless, peaceful engineers who built tiny research vessels and transport ships, humans who avoided war, humans who had no fleets, no battleships, no powerful technology, and definitely nothing like this monstrous steel leviathan hovering in the dark. And the captain felt his blood run cold, because no imperial record showed humans building warships at all, much less something large enough to dwarf an entire imperial fleet. His voice trembled as he whispered, This can't be real." But the scanner confirmed it, pulsing the word human again and again like a heartbeat carved into metal. and silence fell over the ship, heavy and suffocating. Because if this was human technology, then everything the Empire believed about humanity was wrong. Fear spread like wildfire across the bridge, officers stammering, "Humans are weak. Humans are peaceful. Humans can't build this." But the giant warship hung in space like a silent answer to their denial, a contradiction so massive it shattered their understanding. And one young officer, pale and trembling, whispered the words everyone was too afraid to say. If humans built this, what else did they build? The question hung in the air like a threat, and suddenly every crew member felt small, fragile, exposed, because the presence of this warship implied a truth more terrifying than any enemy. The possibility that humanity had been hiding its strength for years, decades, maybe centuries. The captain's hands shook as he sent an emergency transmission to the Empire, voice cracking. Unidentified warship detected, size beyond classification. Human origin indicated, request immediate orders. And as the message traveled across the stars, no one on the patrol ship moved, no one breathed, because they all felt the same thing deep in their bones. A feeling colder than space, sharper than fear, the sense that they hadn't discovered a wreck. They had awakened something, a secret, a sleeping giant left adrift for reasons they could not understand. Minutes dragged on like hours, the warship towering over them in perfect stillness, its armor reflecting their tiny patrol ship like an insect floating before a mountain. And every second of silence made their hearts beat louder, their nerves coil tighter, until finally the Imperial response arrived, a single urgent command. Do not engage. Do not approach. Maintain distance until analysis arrives. But even as they read the order, their sensors beeped again, catching something faint, something impossible. A heartbeat, a power signature buried deep inside the warship, so small it almost didn't register, yet unmistakably alive. And when the reading locked, every alarm blared at once, screens flashing red with a message none of them were prepared to see. Activity detected. And before anyone could react, before anyone could speak, a soft, deep rumble echoed through the void. The first sign of movement in the giant ship, like metal breathing after 1,000 years of sleep, and in a single terrified whisper, the communications officer said the words that would change the galaxy forever. The moment those trembling words left the communications officer's mouth, the patrol ship fell into a silence so thick it felt suffocating, every crew member frozen in place, eyes locked on the colossal shadow outside their viewport, because something inside that impossible warship was moving, slow, deep, ancient, like the first breath of a creature that had been asleep for centuries. And as the scanners beeped faster, picking up a growing energy pulse buried somewhere in the heart of the vessel, fear tightened every throat on the bridge, hearts pounding so loud they could hear their own pulse in their ears. Yet no one dared speak, no one dared blink, no one dared look away, because the warship seemed to grow larger by the second, not physically, but in presence, in weight, in the crushing realization that they were standing too close to something the galaxy was never meant to find. The captain's hands shook violently as he tried to reroute the scanners, desperate to prove it was a glitch, malfunction, a lie, but the readings only grew clearer, stronger, more detailed, resolving into a single horrifying truth. Power was returning to the ship's core, systems were waking up, and a low hum vibrated through the patrol vessel's hull, so faint it could have been imagined. Yet every officer felt it in their bones, a tremor like distant thunder crawling through the void, and one of the younger crew members, barely out of training, whispered through dry lips, "Why would a human ship be out here?" But no one answered, because no one had an answer. No one had even a theory, and the fear in their chests twisted into something sharper. Confusion, disbelief, dread. Because humanity was not a war species, not a technological powerhouse, not a civilization known for building behemoths of steel, and yet here was a warship larger than anything the Empire had ever constructed. The captain finally forced himself to speak, though his voice cracked. Pull back, slowly. But before the pilot could respond, the scanner flashed a new message, shield activation detected, and a ripple of shimmering light rolled across the warship's surface, like a sleeping beast flexing its armor. And the patrol ship trembled as every proximity alarm exploded in shrill warning, because the energy reading wasn't just high. It was off the charts, beyond measurable limits, a type of shielding technology no Imperial engineer had ever recorded. And the science officer gasped, eyes wide with horror. That shield? It's stronger than our capital defensive nets. And that sentence alone sent a shockwave of panic through the bridge, because if this was human work, if this was human design, then humanity's true capabilities had been hidden, buried, masked behind an illusion the entire galaxy had believed, that humans were harmless. The captain scrambled to open a channel to Imperial Command, voice shaking as he transmitted live visuals, stammering. The ship is powering on. We need immediate reinforcement. We need... But before he could finish, the transmission cut abruptly, not by failure, not by Imperial override, but by interference. Dense, heavy, deliberate interference pouring off the warship, jamming their systems, silencing their call for help, and the room filled with terrified breaths as the realization sank in. The warship knew they were there. The navigation lights flickered, the air felt cold, and the young officer closest to the viewport took a single step back, eyes glassy with fear, whispering, "Is it looking at us?" Because the massive ship was no longer drifting aimlessly, no longer dead, no longer dormant. It had turned, just slightly, but enough to align its colossal bow directly toward the tiny patrol vessel. A movement so slow yet so purposeful that it felt like a gaze, a stare, an acknowledgement, and in that moment every alien on board felt small, fragile, insignificant, like insects before a god of steel. Then, deep within the warship, something ignited, an engine, core, a heart, sending a deep vibration through the void. A pulse so powerful that the patrol ship's lights flickered again, systems groaning under the pressure, and the scanner registered a single faint signal, lifeform detected, and the science officer's voice broke in disbelief. There's only one life sign inside. And the bridge fell dead silent as they processed the meaning of those words. This entire impossible warship, this giant leviathan of metal and power, was being operated by a single being. A single human. The captain staggered back, breath trembling, because the idea was unthinkable. Humans barely piloted medium vessels, barely operated military craft, barely fielded frigates, and even those were outdated, peaceful exploration ships, nothing like this nightmare of steel before them, and yet the scanner confirmed it again. Species, human, and the young officer stumbled into his chair, shaking his head over and over, whispering, "Humans can't fly ships like this. Humans can't build ships like this. Humans can't." But the ship outside cut those words apart as a line of faint blue lights flickered along its hull, like veins awakening, like circuitry remembering its purpose, and a deep mechanical groan rumbled through the void. The communications officer tried to open a new channel, tried to send a message, any message, even a plea, but before he could speak, every monitor on the patrol ship went black, the screens dark as void, the circuitry silenced, and then a single phrase appeared across every display in bold, ancient Terran script, "Human warship online," and the alien crew felt their blood run cold, breath stolen from their lungs, as if the void itself had answered their fear. The captain's voice was barely a whisper now, barely a breath, as he stared at the glowing words that seemed to burn through the darkness. This is impossible." And for a moment no one moved, no one breathed, until the ship outside released a soft mechanical hiss, and a small section of its armor shifted open, revealing a massive hangar door glowing with faint white light, like an eye opening, like a signal, like a warning, and at that moment the truth slammed into every soul aboard the patrol. This warship was not dead. The hangar door on the massive warship yawned wider and wider, metal shifting with a slow, thunderous groan that vibrated through the patrol ship's hull like the heartbeat of some awakening titan, and every alien on the bridge felt their knees weaken, their breath shorten, because nothing about this felt mechanical or routine. This felt intentional, deliberate, as if the ship itself was aware of their presence, as if it was opening its eyes after a long sleep and finally looking back, and the pale glow spilling from the hangar wasn't bright or welcoming, but cold and silent, a light that felt more like a warning than an invitation, and the navigation officer grabbed the edge of his console with shaking hands as he whispered, It's activating systems." Because the scanners were going wild, detecting power surges crawling across the warship's internal grid, dormant systems coming alive like nerves reconnecting after centuries of darkness. The patrol captain tried to steady his voice, tried to sound like a leader, but fear cracked every word as he croaked. Reverse thrusters. Back us away, slowly. Yet the pilot's fingers trembled so badly, he missed the first switch. And, when he finally engaged the engines, the patrol ship lurched backward only a few meters before every thruster warning light flashed red. Alarms screeching, propulsion interference detected, and the science officer looked up with pure terror in her eyes. It's disrupting our engines. And that realization hit the entire crew like ice water. This warship wasn't just waking up, it was exerting control over the space around it, manipulating fields and frequencies with technology so advanced the Empire had no reference for it, no defense, no understanding, and the young officer closest to the viewport choked on his breath. It's holding us here. Because the patrol ship was frozen in space, unable to retreat, unable to move, pinned like a fragile insect before an enormous predator. Then, as if responding to their panic, the giant vessel shifted again, and a faint ripple of blue light spread across its surface in a wave that wrapped around the enormous hull like an awakening pulse. And, for the first time, the alien crew truly grasped the scale. This was not just a ship. This was a floating city, a mobile fortress, a machine so vast it made their patrol craft feel microscopic, meaningless. And as the pulse reached the warship's prow, a new sound filled the void. A deep, steady hum, rhythmic and heavy, almost like breathing, and the communications officer swallowed hard, voice trembling so badly it barely formed words. Core power, rising exponentially. Because the readings were climbing so fast they broke the scanner's upper limits, numbers blurring, graphs spiking until the display glitched. The captain, voice raw with terror, slammed the emergency broadcast switch, shouting into the void. Imperial Command, this is Patrol Unit 7. The vessel is fully awakening. We require evacuation, immediate evacuation. But only static answered him, a suffocating silence that made every heart on the bridge drop. Because they all knew what static meant. The warship wasn't just jamming communications. It was blocking the Empire out completely, sealing them off, isolating them like prey, and the captain whispered hoarsely, "We're alone." And that sentence hung in the air like a death sentence. Then, without warning, the warship's hangar lights flared brighter, and something moved inside. A faint silhouette at first, then a clearer outline. Tall, upright, humanoid, and the patrol crew recoiled in horror, because it wasn't a drone, wasn't a robot, wasn't a machine, it was a person, a lone figure walking slowly through the vast interior of the warship, steps echoing like distant thunder, each one amplified by the ship's awakening systems. And when the scanners locked onto the life form again, the result flashed across every screen in bold letters. Human pilot confirmed, and the bridge erupted in panic. Officers stumbled backward, some falling, others clutching their chests, eyes wide and watery, because the idea was impossible. A single human piloting a vessel that dwarfed Imperial megaships, a single human commanding technology beyond their understanding, and the youngest crew member broke into a terrified whisper. One human controls all of that? And no one answered, because the truth was too big, too terrifying, too shattering to speak aloud. The figure inside the warship approached a colossal command platform, and suddenly every light inside the ship blinked in perfect unison, triggering a deep resonance that shook the patrol vessel harder than any weapon blast, and then a voice. Not shouted. Not aggressive.com.soft.human.it echoed directly into their ship's intercom system without permission, without invitation, without encryption, as if the warship had casually broken through every barrier in existence. And the voice spoke just 2 words, "System online." The patrol crew froze, breath locked in their throats, because that voice wasn't fearful, wasn't confused. It was steady, composed, almost emotionless, like someone turning on a light switch after a long night. And then a second phrase followed, chilling them to the core. Human warship Leviathan activating. The name slashed through the silence like a blade. Leviathan. A myth, a legend, a whispered rumor buried in classified files about an abandoned human superproject that was never completed, never launched, never proven real. And the captain felt his knees buckle as he choked. No, those were just stories. Humans never built anything like this. But the warship outside seemed to answer him, massive engines flickering with blue fire, metal vibrating with purpose, as if awakening not just from sleep, but from centuries of waiting. Finally, the Leviathan shifted forward by a fraction, and even that tiny movement made the patrol vessel shudder violently, gravity dampeners whining under the strain, and the navigation officer grabbed the console with both hands, eyes wide with helpless terror. "If it moves any closer, we'll be crushed." And the young officer near the viewport whispered, voice breaking, "Why would humans build something like this? They don't wage war. They don't fight." But deep down, in the silence that followed, every soul on that bridge felt a terrible possibility sinking into their bones. Maybe humans didn't build Leviathan to fight. Maybe they built it because someday, they knew they would have to. And as the warship's colossal engines roared softly to life, the patrol crew realized the most frightening truth of all. This wasn't the peak of human power. This was just the beginning. The Leviathan's engines grew louder. Not in volume but in presence. A deep vibrating force that seemed to shake the emptiness of space itself. And on the tiny patrol ship, every alien felt that sound in their bones, like a warning from the universe, like a storm building behind silent clouds. And as the massive warship drifted just a little farther into motion, its impossible size becoming fully visible for the first time, the patrol crew finally understood the scale of their mistake. This was not a derelict, not a relic, not a drifting ruin. This was a functioning warship so vast it made their largest Imperial dreadnoughts look like children's toys, and while they stared, paralyzed, the Imperial response fleet finally began to arrive, ships dropping out of hyperspace one by one. Then dozens, then hundreds, forming a ring around the Leviathan, every ship armed. Every commander terrified yet trying to sound in control as they barked orders and scanned the giant vessel. And the void that had once been a dead, lonely stretch of space now swarmed with Imperial cruisers, battleships, carriers, all positioning themselves like insects around a sleeping Colossus, their weapons glowing, their shields raised, their captains whispering in disbelief. "There's no way this is human. It can't be." But no matter how many times they said it, no matter how desperately they clung to denial, the truth sat in front of them, cold, silent, undeniable. Imperial Command opened a channel to the patrol captain, their voice strained and urgent. "Do not provoke it, do not engage, we repeat, do not engage." But even as the message echoed through the patrol ship, the science officer stared at her monitor in dawning horror as she whispered, "They already have." Because the Imperial fleet, rattled by fear and pride, had already locked targeting systems onto the Leviathan, hundreds of red targeting beams flickering across its hull like angry sparks. And, despite Command's order, one nervous commander panicked, his voice shaking as he shouted to his crew, "Fire warning shots. Force it to stand down." And before anyone could stop him, a barrage of golden energy bolts exploded from the Imperial lines, streaking across space and slamming into the Leviathan's hull in a cascade of blinding light. The patrol crew shielded their eyes, the blast lighting up the darkness like a star being born, and for a heartbeat it felt as if the galaxy itself was holding its breath, until the light faded, the smoke cleared, and the truth emerged. The Leviathan hadn't moved, hadn't tilted, hadn't shown a single scratch, the shields hadn't even flickered, and the Imperial officers stared in numb shock as their most powerful weapons registered as zeros on damage reports. Like they had fired nothing at all, and a terrified whisper rippled through the fleet. It didn't even notice, because that was the horror. The Leviathan was so far beyond them that their strongest attack was less than dust against its armor, less than a breeze against a mountain. Then every Imperial ship received an unauthorized transmission, a single feed hijacking their communications, and Admiral Saren, the Empire's sector commander, leaned closer to his screen with trembling breath as a message appeared. Not an image, not a voice, just words in ancient Terran text glowing white against the black void. "Human technology does not fear your weapons." The fleet went still, throats tightening, hearts pounding, because the message wasn't loud, wasn't violent, wasn't threatening. It was calm, confident, absolute. Admiral Saren tried to respond, shouting into the channel, "Identify yourself. State your purpose. This is Imperial territory." But his voice cracked halfway through. breaking under fear he didn't want his soldiers to hear. And before he could speak again, a second message flashed across every screen. "We did not come to threaten you." For a moment, a tiny thread of hope flickered through the Imperial ranks, commanders glancing at each other, wondering if maybe, just maybe, this human warship could be reasoned with. But that fragile hope shattered as the Leviathan's hangar lights flared brighter, illuminating rows of internal machinery, weapons, systems, corridors, and something deeper, a vast chamber filled with dormant structures like launch bays or internal stations, technology so alien and advanced that even Imperial engineers couldn't recognize its purpose. The science officer on the patrol ship stared, breath unsteady, as she whispered, "This is centuries beyond anything we have." And the young crewman beside her slowly shook his head, eyes wide with fear. "Not centuries, maybe millennia." And the captain felt the cold, creeping realization that everything the Empire believed about its supremacy, its dominance, its technological superiority, had just been shattered in a single moment by a ship they didn't even know existed, from a species they never considered a threat. Imperial Command, desperate to regain control, sent out a broadcast across every channel, their voice stern but trembling beneath the surface. "Unknown human vessel, you are ordered to stand down and surrender for investigation." But before the words could finish echoing, a new voice rolled through the void, transmitted into every Imperial ship, every console, every headset, a voice unmistakably human, calm, steady, emotionless. "We do not surrender." The words hit harder than any weapon because they weren't shouted, they weren't angry, they weren't aggressive. They were simply true, spoken with the quiet certainty of someone who didn't need to prove their power. And as the Leviathan's engines surged with brighter light, the Imperial fleet instinctively backed away, fear overriding training, instinct overriding protocol, because every captain, every soldier, every officer felt it. Their empire had never faced anything like this. Then, slowly, impossibly, Leviathan extended a massive array from its hull, like a metal wing unfolding, and deep inside, its core throbbed with a pulse of energy so massive that scanners across the fleet overloaded and shut down. Screens going static, alarms blaring, and Admiral Saren's voice cracked as he shouted, "Shields to maximum. Prepare for impact." But nothing happened. No weapon fired. No strike came. Only silence, deep and endless. And in that silence a final message appeared, glowing across every ship, every screen, every trembling pair of eyes. "This is only one ship, one warship, one human presence, and the galaxy," for the first time in its proud, ancient history, realized it wasn't ready for even that. And somewhere deep inside every Imperial soul, a cold truth whispered like a blade against the spine. The words "this is only one" hung in the air like a death sentence, echoing across every Imperial ship, every trembling officer, every frightened soldier, and for a long, crushing moment, no one dared speak, no one dared breathe, because the implication was too big, too terrifying, too world-breaking. If this massive warship, this impossible giant, this Leviathan, was only one, then humanity might possess more, maybe dozens, maybe hundreds, maybe an entire fleet of God-sized machines waiting somewhere in the dark. And that thought alone sent a cold shiver ripping through the Empire's spine, collapsing pride into fear, confidence into panic, superiority into silence, and Admiral Saren felt his stomach twist as he realized the most frightening truth of all. Everything the Empire believed about humans, everything they taught, everything they mocked, every claim that humans were weak, harmless, small, might have been a lie. The Leviathan's core pulsed again, brighter this time. A deep blue glow radiating from its armor like the heartbeat of a star trapped inside metal, and the patrol crew could feel the vibration in their bones, as if space itself was trembling under the weight of its power. And the science officer, pale and shaking, stammered, "That energy output, it's beyond recorded limits. Nothing in the galaxy can generate that much power." And her voice broke when she added, "Not even our empire." Because saying it aloud made it real, made it undeniable, made it terrifying, and the navigation officer's hands shook violently as he whispered, "If humanity had this, why didn't they use it before? Why didn't they show it?" But the captain already knew the answer deep in his gut, An answer so chilling it made his breath hitch, because maybe humanity hadn't needed to. Maybe humanity had been hiding, waiting, preparing, building in silence while the galaxy laughed at them, underestimated them, dismissed them, and Leviathan was proof that humans hadn't been behind. They had been ahead, impossibly ahead. Then, as if responding to their fear, the giant warship emitted a sound. Not a roar, not an alarm, but a low, resonant tone that echoed through every hull in the fleet, vibrating through metal, through skin, through bone. A sound so ancient and powerful it felt less like a noise and more like a memory, something primal, something that awakened fear older than language, and the youngest officer on the patrol ship clutched his chest, eyes wide, choking on his breath as he whispered, "It feels alive," and no one corrected him because they all felt it too. The Leviathan didn't feel like a machine, didn't feel like metal and circuits. It felt like something sentient, something aware, something with purpose. And then it moved. Not much, not fast, but enough to make every Imperial ship recoil instinctively, engines flaring as captains shouted orders to retreat, formations breaking apart in raw panic, discipline collapsing in the face of something too enormous to comprehend. And even the most hardened admirals felt their courage drain as they watched the Leviathan turn its colossal bulk toward the center of the fleet, shadows falling over their ships like the eclipse of a star, and Admiral Saren's voice cracked as he screamed, "Do not fire! Hold positions!" But fear drowned command, fear strangled protocol, fear overpowered training, and one terrified captain, voice shrill and shaking, gave the order the Empire would regret forever: launch full barrage. In an instant the void erupted, hundreds of missiles streaking across space, beams cutting through the dark like lightning, detonations lighting the Leviathan's hull in blinding bursts, and the patrol ship shook violently under the shockwaves, alarms howling, panels sparking, officers screaming as they held onto whatever they could. But when the light faded, when the smoke cleared, when the readings stabilized, every heart stopped cold. The Leviathan was untouched, unburned, unfazed, not even a scorch mark on its armor, its shields not dimmed, not flickered, not strained, and the damage report registered the Empire's full might with a single devastating reading, 0% effective, and silence crushed the fleet like a fist closing around their throats. The comms crackled with broken voices, some crying, some gasping, some begging for orders, but no one knew what to do. No one knew how to fight something that didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge their attack, and Admiral Saren felt something break inside him as he whispered, barely audible, "We are insects to it." Because that was the truth. They weren't opponents, they weren't threats, they were irrelevant. Then, impossibly, the Leviathan spoke again, its voice calm, even gentle, yet carrying through every ship, every mind, every soul with terrifying clarity. "We will not harm you unless you force us to." The words were simple, but the emotion behind them wasn't anger. It was restraint, heavy restraint, as if the Leviathan held back a storm capable of erasing the fleet in a single breath, and the patrol captain's hands shook violently as he whispered, "If this is restraint, what does full power look like?" And no one dared imagine the answer. Lights rippled across the Leviathan's armor in a pattern like awakening veins, the energy pulse spreading outward, and suddenly the scanners picked up something new, something far more terrifying than the warship itself. A signal, faint but massive, stretching from Leviathan into deep space, like a beacon, a call, a summons, and the science officer felt her throat close as she choked. "It's signaling something," and the navigation officer whispered, voice breaking, "Something big." And the young crew member asked the question no one wanted to face. "Is it calling for more human ships?" No one answered that, and no one could. But every soul on board felt the same cold truth crash through their hearts like a tidal wave. The Leviathan wasn't alone. The signal pulsing out from the Leviathan spread through space like an invisible ripple, silent but colossal, and every Imperial sensor struggled to track it, readings spiking, systems overheating, screens glitching as if the very fabric of the void was being disturbed. And on the bridge of the patrol ship the science officer stared in horror, her voice barely a breath. "This transmission, it's not communication, it's activation." And those words sent a cold, paralyzing dread through every officer, because activation meant something else was listening, something else was waiting, Something else was connected to the Leviathan, and Admiral Saren, standing rigid on his command deck, felt his heart sink as he whispered to himself, "There are more." His voice cracking under the weight of that terrifying thought, because if this monstrous vessel, already beyond comprehension, was only one of many, then the Empire's entire military might was meaningless, laughable, doomed before the first battle even began. The Leviathan's engines flared brighter, blue-white lights spilling across its armor like veins of a waking titan, and then, for the first time, its colossal main cannon shifted, rotating with slow, precise motion, its barrel larger than the entire patrol ship, its metallic plates unfolding like the jaws of some ancient beast, and every Imperial heart seized in terror, commanders shouting orders. Shields to maximum. Scatter formation. Evasive maneuvers. But it was useless, because the Leviathan wasn't aiming at them at all, its cannon lifting higher, angling toward something deeper in space, toward a patch of darkness that looked no different from the rest, yet somehow felt heavier, colder, wrong, and the navigation officer blinked rapidly, eyes wide with confusion. "There's nothing there." But even as he said it, the scanners contradicted him, flickering with readings, massive readings, like a presence hidden behind a curtain of void. And when the numbers stabilized, the bridge went deathly still, because the size of that hidden object dwarfed even the Leviathan. Before anyone could process the horror of that truth, the entire void shook, a deep tremor rolling through space like a shockwave, and suddenly a distortion appeared in the darkness, a swirling tear of energy, like a black star collapsing in reverse, widening, warping, twisting, and every Imperial ship rocked violently under the gravitational pull, alarms screaming, metal groaning, officers tumbling from their stations as the void itself opened into a colossal gateway, and through it came a sound, or maybe a feeling, like billions of voices screaming in silence, and the young crewman on the patrol ship clutched his head, eyes wide with terror, gasping, "What is that? What is that?" But no one had an answer. No one had ever seen anything like it, because nothing in the galaxy had ever torn open space like this. And then they saw it, a shadow beyond the gateway, huge, endless, alive. Not a ship, not a structure, not a fleet, an entire fleet of unknown vessels, jagged and monstrous, their silhouettes flickering with unnatural energy, their forms shifting like nightmares carved into metal, and the scanners blasted red warnings. Unknown species detected, hostile signatures, weapon charges imminent, and the patrol captain's voice cracked in raw panic. "It's not humans, it's something else." And Admiral Saren staggered back, heart pounding, eyes filled with disbelief, because this was not a human army emerging from the dark. This was something older, darker, predatory, a force the Empire had never encountered, and its ships surged forward like a swarm of colossal predators answering the beacon they had waited centuries to hear. The Leviathan had not called for. Allies.it had called for the enemy, and that realization struck the Imperial fleet like a blade to the spine, collapsing denial into terror, because whatever these things were, they were coming fast, energy weapons crackling, engines roaring. Their numbers so vast the scanners glitched trying to count them, and the young officer whispered through trembling lips, "The Leviathan wasn't built to attack us," and the science officer finished in a shaking breath. "It was built to fight them." The swarm opened fire. Thousands of beams streaked through the void, tearing into the Imperial ships, ripping cruisers apart like paper, detonating battleships in showers of molten metal, and the fleet descended into chaos. Shouts, screams, explosions echoing through comms as one ship after another was obliterated, and Admiral Saren cried out, "Retreat! All ships fall back!" But it was too late, because the attackers were too many, too powerful, too fast, and the fleet was already dying. Then, through the carnage, a single voice echoed through every Imperial channel, steady, calm, human. "Stand down. Do not fire. We will handle this." And before the Empire could even process the command, the Leviathan fired .1 blast. Just one, a beam of energy so bright it turned space white, so powerful it vaporized an entire line of enemy warships in a single instant, not breaking them, not damaging them, erasing them, and the shock wave rippled outward, sending the remaining enemy ships reeling, their formations shattered, their advance halted for the first time since emerging from the gateway, and the patrol crew stared in stunned silence, breath caught in their throats, because the Leviathan wasn't just strong. It was beyond comprehension, beyond physics, beyond the limits of known reality. And in that moment, every Imperial officer felt the same cold, emotional weight crush their chest. The Leviathan had never been humanity's threat, it had been humanity's shield. And as the enemy swarm regrouped in the distance, preparing to strike again, the human voice spoke once more, softer this time, almost mournful. You were never our enemy. Those 7 words shattered the galaxy's arrogance, its assumptions, its pride, and replaced it with something far more powerful and far more painful: respect. Because humanity hadn't built Leviathan to conquer the stars. The enemy swarm surged forward again, regrouping from the staggering blow, thousands of twisted warships fanning out like a tidal wave of metal and hunger, their engines screaming with a sound that felt wrong, unnatural, predatory. And as their weapons crackled to life, the Imperial fleet trembled in pure helpless terror, because their shields were shattered, their formations broken, their ships drifting like wounded animals in a sea of nightmares, and Admiral Saren could only watch as more hostile vessels poured through the rift, countless silhouettes blotting out the stars until the void wasn't black anymore. It was crawling, alive, suffocating, and the realization crashed through every soul, crushing and undeniable. This wasn't a battle the Empire could win. This wasn't an enemy they could outrun. This wasn't even a war they could comprehend. This was extinction. The Leviathan moved again, slow, steady, unhurried, like a mountain shifting, like a god waking, and the patrol crew felt that motion in their bones, their hearts thudding against their ribs as if the ship's presence rewrote gravity itself, and the science officer clutched her console, voice cracking under emotional weight. It's positioning itself between us and them, and the young crewman gasped, tears brimming in his eyes. It's protecting us because the Leviathan wasn't advancing toward. The Empire wasn't aiming its impossible weapons at them, wasn't treating them as enemies at all. It had moved like a shield, like a barrier standing between the helpless and the unstoppable, and for the first time in Imperial history, the Empire realized they weren't the center of the galaxy. They were the ones being defended. Then the Leviathan spoke again, the human voice echoing through every shattered comm channel. Calm as still water, steady as iron. Do not engage. You are not equipped for this. The words weren't insulting. They were painfully true, and Admiral Saren's voice shook as he whispered the question that every terrified officer felt burning in their chest. If we're not equipped, who is? And the Leviathan answered not with words, but with action. Panels along its colossal hull slid open with thunderous resonance, revealing rows upon rows of weapon systems unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Vast arrays that glowed with unreal light, massive cannons humming with energy so dense scanners couldn't measure it. A power so overwhelming the void itself seemed to pulse around it, and as the enemy swarm closed in, snarling across sensors with murderous intent, the Leviathan unleashed a flurry of light. Not chaotic, not frantic, but graceful, precise, measured, each blast carving through enemy ships with surgical finality, erasing hundreds at a time, turning the tide of battle in a single sweeping wave. The void lit up like sunrise, beams of impossible energy streaking across space, ripping apart the monstrous fleet piece by piece, and the Empire watched in awe and disbelief as the Leviathan fought. Not with panic, not with rage, but with the calm certainty of something built for this moment, something forged to stand against the darkness, something humanity had prepared long before the Empire even knew such darkness existed, and the young patrol officer choked through trembling lips. Humans knew about them, and the captain felt the truth slice through his chest. Humans had never been preparing for other species, never been building weapons to conquer the galaxy. They had been preparing for this threat. Still, the swarm did not break. It screamed forward, relentless, endless, ships hurling themselves like a living storm, and as the battle raged, the Leviathan's voice came again, softer, edged with something heavy, grief, maybe, or memory. We built Leviathan after we first encountered them. We were not ready then. The words hit like a punch to the soul, because hidden within them was a history no one knew. A battle humans had fought alone. A horror they had faced in secret. a loss so devastating it forced them to construct a machine beyond logic, beyond scale, beyond reason, and the science officer whispered, shaken, "They tried to protect us without telling us?" And Admiral Saren closed his eyes as realization washed over him. While the galaxy mocked humans as weak, small, harmless, humanity had been carrying a burden none of them could imagine. Another wave of enemy ships surged forward, aiming not at the Leviathan, but at the scattered Imperial remnants, targeting the weak, the broken, the dying, and before anyone could scream, the Leviathan accelerated. Faster than anything its size should be able to move. Intercepting the attack, placing itself directly in the line of fire, taking the full brunt of a barrage so catastrophic it would have annihilated the remaining Empire ships. And when the blast cleared, the Leviathan was still there, shields blazing, armor unscarred, and every Imperial heart broke a little, because the humans had taken a strike meant for them. The Empire, proud, arrogant, ancient, found itself shaking, humbled, emotional, and Admiral Saren's voice cracked as he whispered, "Why would they save us?" And the Leviathan answered in a voice filled with quiet, devastating truth, "Because we remember what it's like to be alone." A silence fell, deeper than fear, heavier than war. A silence of understanding, of painful respect, of shared vulnerability. And in that silence the Leviathan's weapons charged again, preparing for the final counterattack, and every Imperial soul felt a strange, unfamiliar feeling rising in their chest. Not fear, not pride, but hope, because for the first time in the Empire's history, they weren't fighting alone. And as the Leviathan surged forward like a steel titan against the endless swarm, one undeniable truth echoed through every trembling heart. The enemy swarm hurled itself forward in one final, desperate, all-consuming charge, a black ocean of twisting metal and shrieking engines blotting out what little starlight remained. Their numbers so overwhelming that even the scanners stopped trying to calculate, screens drowning in red warnings, alarms wailing like dying ghosts across every Imperial ship, and the remnants of the fleet could only watch, breathless and broken, as the void became a living storm of death racing toward them, because they had nothing left. No shields, no weapons, no hope, and Admiral Saren felt his chest tighten with a painful, helpless truth. If the Leviathan fell now, the Empire, the galaxy, everything they knew would fall with it. But the Leviathan did not retreat. It did not hesitate. It did not fear. It surged forward alone, a single colossal guardian standing between annihilation and survival, its engines roaring with a power that shook the void like thunder, its colossal form cutting through the darkness like a rising star. And the human voice echoed once more across every comm channel, calm but heavy with emotion, "This ends now." Then the Leviathan unleashed everything. Not rage, not chaos, not wild destruction, but precision, control, purpose. Panels along its armor split open in synchronized waves, revealing layers of hidden weaponry the galaxy had never seen. Vast spiraling arrays glowing with white-blue light, rotating cannons humming with energy so dense it bent the space around them. And for a heartbeat the entire battlefield fell into stillness. The enemy swarm flickering in eerie silence, the Empire frozen in awe, time itself holding breath. And then light, an explosion of brilliance so massive it washed across the void like a new dawn, beams firing in sweeping arcs, slicing through enemy ships with clean, merciless efficiency, whole sections of the swarm evaporating into dust, warships disintegrating in silence before they even knew they'd been hit, and the rift, the monstrous gateway, shuddered violently, rippling as if struck by a cosmic hammer. The swarm tried to scatter, tried to flee, tried to break away from the Leviathan's reach. But there was nowhere to run. Every path was cut off, every route intercepted, every desperate movement predicted and countered by the warship's impossible systems, as if it had been designed, destined, to fight this enemy, as if it had waited centuries for this exact moment. And the human voice, softer now, almost mournful, whispered through the comms, "We were too late the first time. We will not be too late again." Those words hit the Empire harder than any blast, because inside them was history, loss, failure, sorrow, pain no one else in the galaxy had even known existed. Humanity had faced this horror before, alone. and they had built the Leviathan so no one else ever would. The final phase began when the Leviathan aimed all its energy toward the rift, its weapons converging on that pulsing tear in space, power surging until the ship's hull glowed like a burning star, and the scanners screamed with impossible readings, numbers climbing into ranges no machine could quantify, and the patrol crew pressed against the viewport, tears in their eyes, because they understood the Leviathan wasn't just destroying the swarm. It was closing the doorway forever. With a deafening burst of blinding white light, the Leviathan fired its full combined arsenal. A single unified blast that tore through the void like a cosmic spear, ripping into the rift with unstoppable force, collapsing the gateway inward, crushing the swarm between imploding dimensions, until the scream of energy gave way to silence. Deep, pure, absolute, and when the light faded, the enemy was gone. The rift was gone. The threat was gone. What remained was one titan, one warship, one silent guardian drifting in the calm, empty void. The Empire stared in stunned disbelief, tears streaking down faces that had never known surrender, never known humility, never known gratitude, until Admiral Saren fell to his knees and whispered, voice trembling, "Humanity saved us?" And the words felt unreal, fragile, sacred, because everything the Empire believed, about strength, about power, about superiority, had been shattered by a species they once dismissed as weak. Then, slowly, the Leviathan turned. Not toward the enemy's remnants, there were none. Not toward conquest, there was nothing left to conquer. But toward the Empire's broken, drifting fleet. A moment of stillness hung in the air, the galaxy holding its breath in raw, trembling fear, because no one knew what would happen next. Would humanity demand tribute, domination, surrender? Instead, the Leviathan spoke one final time, its voice softer than any before, filled with quiet sorrow and weary strength. "We are not your masters. We are not your enemies. We are simply human." And then, after a long, aching pause, the voice added, "And we will always stand between the galaxy and the darkness." Without ceremony, without threat, without victory cries, the Leviathan powered down its weapons, dimmed its engines, and began to drift away. Slowly, silently, back into the vast, uncharted darkness from which it had come. The Imperial fleet, battered and breathless, could only watch as the colossal warship disappeared beyond the stars, a fading silhouette against infinity, leaving behind only one final encrypted message across every surviving screen. "If ever the darkness returns, look for the human light." For a long time, no one spoke. No one moved. The Empire, once proud and unshakable, stood humbled, shaken to its core, forever changed. And throughout the galaxy, in whispered voices and trembling hearts, a new truth took root, one that would echo through history.